All right. I think we're here with friends at this point. We have Mira on my left, right?
It's me.
Yeah, that's right. Christy and David and myself, Corday. And we're really going to keep this as informal, as much as a kitchen table as possible, right? And I'm going to start with a few questions, but I think some of the ideas that we were talking about earlier in terms of collaboration could also feed back into maybe just this conversation, right? So this first question is going to be a difficult one, but I'm curious what your couch looks like.
What our couch looks like?
Yeah, like what does your couch look like? Where can you describe it to me?
My couch is a hand-me-down
Uh-huh.
from someone, and it's a very kind of classic riff on a modern couch. So very clean lines, floated off the ground, and it's an L shape.
It's an L shape.
It's an L shape.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which is great for being able to feel like you're with someone, but also
Yeah.
spatially feel like you each have very different
Yeah,
territories.
you could separate if you need to.
Right.
There's enough
Right.
space.
Again,
on the couch.
I'm sort of leaning into the collaboration here.
That's right.
Where this couch thing might go.
Got you.
I have a green couch. I really like it. It's
Okay.
actually not so different from your shirt. It's kind of olivey. But we got a couple cats during the pandemic, and they've kind of shredded it. So that's where my couch is at, shredded by the pandemic, I think.
Okay, fair enough.
So Corday is very psychic, but I just got a new couch today.
All right.
My couch arrived. I ordered my couch 9 months ago. It was a couch that I saw 9 years ago in New York and thought to myself, man, one day I really want a couch like that. And so I ordered it 9 months ago, and it came today, and it got brought in. And it's really fat, and it's green just like that, and it's leather, and it folds in, and it's just like it kind of feels already like you don't need to sit in it. It already looks like somebody's. It looks happy without anybody on it.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I love
Yeah.
that. And I guess the reason why I ask about the couch, because I feel like each one of you have a very intimate relationship to homes, right? And houses, and what does it mean to have a house and to design a house, right? So I'm curious, what's your relationship to building houses? And I feel like most architects, it's probably one of their first projects is working on a home. So I'm just curious, what does that mean to you?
Maybe I'm not sure if you're as psychic with me, or maybe you are, just because
Did you just buy a house?
No, I'm 25 years into practice, and we are doing our first house right now. And so most of my career has been, for whatever reason, like when I was institutional scale. It had things like dormitories, but that's a very different scale than like a single family home. So actually, pretty deep into the middle of my career, I would say, is the first time that I'm actually designing something at that level of intimacy, which I think is, maybe quite different than where your head has been in.
Well, I mean, my question would be a house for who exactly? I mean, I'm actually working on designing a house along with my wife and design partner on this, design a house for ourselves, for our family. So a house for us versus a house for a client, for someone else, I think that's a big question. Like who's the house for? It's such a, domestic spaces are so intimate, right? And as you're suggesting, like maybe as close and as comfortable as a couch should be. And so I know when you're working with a client on a house, I would say kind of working for, because that's a kind of collaboration, I feel like, when you're working on a home and designing a home for someone. And I think that word, house versus home, is a tricky one as well. House, we can understand maybe more pure architectural terms. Home is maybe something a little bit softer, more subjective and personal. But I think that's, you're kind of working on both things with the client. And that's a hard thing to maybe, it's a different way of connecting with the project than when you're working on it for yourself.
I'm in a similar situation as David. I'm working on a house for myself and my family, and we're in construction in it right now, and then we're also working on several houses for clients, and Matthew and I are working on a client. The easy to make very the relationship to measurement is really different. But I did have a really nice conversation with one of our clients who, as a way of kind of communicating how personal, how important the project is, that he said, can we all link arm in arm and do this work together? He said in an early meeting of just to try and can we all somehow be in it and this sort of same kind of level of a personal way in the project, because that's how kind of intimate the house is for them, and so in that sense, can we understand it as a home in that way too? It's as even testing out on a project that like living environment, and how much of it work, what point does the scale like a home, yeah, and kind of breadth that a space that you would want, versus something where it's really kind of intense, And I think that a lot of us, I know that I kind of design in a really intense way, and at what point does that not fit in a certain context is something that we're talking about a lot.
I mean, that's really interesting to talk about intensity, right? And each one of you have collaborators that you work with, right? I mean, how is that working on a project? What is that intensity like? Is it a 1 to 10? Are you always on a 10? Like you always firing off? Or is it actual conversations about the work and it's more mutual? I'm curious about like what that day-to-day is like.
I have a business partner that I've worked with for over 10 years. We've done lots of houses together. And then I have my wife who's also different partnerships are different on that note. My wife and I, this is a very intense conversation, very intense. And all registers, right? It's not just measurement. It is about dimension. It's about what software to use. It's on like every level. The collaboration is very low intensity because we've done this so many times already, and the collaboration has unfolded over many years now. And so we know what's at stake, and we know which things are kind of part of the discussion, which things are not as important to kind of engage on. But I think with working on our own house, it's intense at every point. And I think that's the case with any collaboration. It's like what is it that is assumed, or kind of is there a mutuality on to begin with? Yeah,
what do you bring to the table too, right? As a collaborator.
Yeah. And what things are contentious and have to be worked through.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, the question, we're just giving Mira time to answer.
I know. It's so full. My brain is very full right now. It's very, very, very full. I think that, initially Matthew and I became partners because we couldn't quite do it all on our own. Like we were kind of like we wanted to do things at a bigger, more than what we could do on our own. So, and we've been really working for the past 3 years kind of as a team, like we do everything kind of together. And now we're finally at a stage where we can actually delegate and have other people in our office help do that work for us. And so right now our register is very high still. Like everything is very intense right now for us because we're really figuring out the infrastructure of and the way to delegate and all of that, which is super intense. Everything feels very precious and intense. But I can see it shifting, and I can imagine it shifting over time. But there's like so much there's so much implicit like trust in the other person, right? Like there's something so. I think that's what has been nice about when thinking about intensity. I think that there's like daily intensities, but the underside of it is actually not particularly, because it's kind of there's trust there, right? Like that's something that is totally shocking, because I didn't know that was something that could be possible, at a certain point, in a creative field like that you could actually have that. So there is that's been a big learning curve and joy, in what it means to kind of build up, and it just keeps growing, right? I mean, because you do a lot of collaborations. I feel like I'm learning how to collaborate more, like what that really means as a practice.
That's right.
And so it's like, what is that like? Yeah, like I think that when I speak with you, I kind of start to understand that it is something. It's not necessarily a one-off, and it's sort of only in that relationship does it work, but actually it can extend, much more broadly, into the way that you kind of work in relationship with people, kind of always,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I kind of veered some of the vocabulary off a bit in terms of intensity to, maybe what does it look like as beyond this particular person to a way to kind of be in the world too. Yeah.
That's a really good point.
That's an interesting, maybe, we appreciate that Corday is kind of moderating us here, but I think, I think we're all here because we have different types of collaborations in what we do. And so I would just maybe put it, I think Mira was already hinting to this, and I think maybe Mira, David, and I are somewhat similar in that we are collaborators, but with a kind of a dominant business partner. Right. And so I'd be curious, from your point of view, it seems like you are, you could be collaborating with Mira on Monday and me on Wednesday and David on Friday. And how does that, how do you manage those different types of relationships? Is there when you start to have multiple collaborations happening at one time, is there is there a hierarchy to them, right? Are they always a 50-50? Are there different ratios? And how do you you know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm going into this conversation and this person's depending on me to bring 75% of the energy.
For sure. Versus
someone else who, I'm one of 10 people, I'm bringing 10%. The way I talk here, the way I communicate is going to be different.
Yeah. I mean, it really, I do some music videos and short films, and that collaboration transforms depending on who I'm talking to or what artist I'm working with. And I really think the central keystone to all of it is community. Anytime I work on a project, I work with people that I like and that I love. It's like, we're going in this together because we all understand that we're trying to, at the end of the day, we're trying to make a product. We're trying to make a thing, not a product, but a thing, right? And I feel like when you go in with those intentions with the people that you really care about, you can get through anything, right? And I think that's really essential when you're working on something, is find people that you actually connect with. And I think I've been lucky enough to keep the projects at a scale where I can do that, right? In terms of a building project, now that's a different sort of hierarchy for sure. But in film, as a director, for me, I try to keep the landscape horizontal as much as possible.
But do you feel like you bring the same, to maybe flip back to the intensity, do you think you bring the same level of intensity to every one of those collaborations, or do you realize, hey, in this scenario, even though this is a community, I know that person is bringing a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And so my role here, you see what I mean?
For
so
sure.
not like a hierarchy and like that person's the boss and not, but just more that level of intensity
Yeah.
that you bring to it.
For sure. I mean, working with Virgil was like, rest in peace, is like, that was wonderful. That was like a different type of intensity, right? Where it was almost like childlike, you know? It's just different. It's just a different type of intensity when it comes to that. Less of a hierarchy and more just like a sort of mutual playground, if you can call it that. Yeah.
So everyone in that sense, everyone's bringing the energy they have.
Everyone's
at that
bringing the
given
energy.
moment.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I guess with a building project, at the end of the day, we want this thing built, right? And that should be the goal of any project is we come in with intentions. Yeah. And I'm curious about the scaling up. Sorry, I'm going to swing it.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the scaling up because each one of you have done an exhibition in this space, right? And now it seems like you all are addressing that scaling up issue. Like as a student, because we're all students, like how do we go from an installation to a building? And are you asking those questions right now for yourself?
I mean, I definitely am, but I feel like I'm kind of like the slowest. I'm like a turtle.
That's okay. That's all right. We
I'm
take
like
our
a
time too.
turtle. I
Yeah.
do take my time. I definitely am. I mean, like what I did at the gallery like 4 years ago are like
Rough coat.
Yeah, it's kind of like just the next thing. They're all like building from it, like one thing at a time for sure. Scaling. Specifying, you know, we're going to be hanging stuff, you know, in the next 6 months that will be coming straight out of that. So, and actually that's something that I don't know that I would have, I think that I had to have somebody else, be in partnership with somebody to help me stay focused on that, you know, because I think that I would probably continue to do a lot of things at once, but to say that in that is like so much, like, can you spend the next 10 years trying to build what that is out? I mean, I think that's kind of where I am, like where we're focused right now is like, how do you actually build out, like in writing, in making, you know, and in like in kind of ideologically too, like how do you unpack it let it unfold for a long period of time? So definitely scaling in all those senses. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So lots of work to do that comes out of that work for me personally.
I mean, I don't know if the scaling just happens in one way or at one time. I mean, I would say that things are constantly scaling up. Our gallery exhibition, we're definitely considering how to scale stuff up from that, but we've scaled things in the past. I think
I want
Yeah,
to hear
scale
about
it down.
Yeah, what does that mean to
well, I mean, even in terms of that exhibition, we of a model to kind of interrogate like printing and perspective and how images may suggest other kinds of three-dimensionality. But that was something that came from the build project. It was not really imagined at all prior to that. It came from a problem of photography, essentially, that we were having difficulty photographing the building. And so these kinds of moments where spatially we knew things were happening, but we couldn't photograph it, and then we tried to draw it, and then we were like, well, maybe we can do something else and make a new model of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like the scaling we came together. It was large,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And like,
yeah.
so families of things and like literal associations, like a certain quantity. And so I think maybe to both sort of some logistic scenarios of, where it fell in the moment. The process of editing for us, that we did one thing, right? That we actually tried to make one singular object that had sort of embedded in it sort of multiple associations, as opposed to always working with kind of sets of things that where we could focus on the sort of in-between. So in this case, the in-between was really just between the object, the gallery walls, and then those gallery walls became blue screens that then like opened up to another world. But
because there was a virtual component.
There was a virtual component, but the physical component had to be condensed down to a singular object. And so I feel like now that we have the opportunity to do, a house, it's also, I mean, the idea of sets of things, the idea of like multiple, I think in Kelly and I's work, there's always like a kind of a tension of character. And so thinking about how do you do that when it's one thing with multiple sides, multiple insides? There's new ways of thinking about sort of multiples. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but I think that scaling down and editing is, I think, what we're working on right now. Because we sort of started our practice a bit on a very speculative playground that had a very large site.
Can I ask a question on that though? So do you think, because if I were to diagnose, maybe knowing your practices, I'm curious, do you see the idea of the conversation between you as part of the DNA, kind of the formal DNA of the work, or is the conversation like you're talking about things like attention or multiples, which suggest something beyond the singular, and you guys being in conversation together, is the fact that the collaboration that actually inform the actual DNA in that sense, like it is about a conversation, or is it? And I don't know that I read that as much in your guys' work, that your work may be like you guys are having a conversation internally, but the work isn't about a conversation of things. Do you know what I mean? Is that a?
Yeah,
I'm
maybe
curious
not
about
so much
that.
a conversation of things,
Right? It's like a single, right? I don't know.
But I mean, to touch on conversation for a little bit in relation to collaboration and the practice, I mean, Brendan and I are having conversations through the work. It's just that the conversations take a lot longer now. When we first started, we would have multiple conversations about different things and had, all these things happening simultaneously. Now it just feels like everything takes such a long time that the conversation just unfolds like over years. So we'll have meetings where we're talking about the project, meaning that we're talking about the architectural issues that really interest us and that we've been trying to work on and make progress on. And we just have those conversations much less frequently than we used to. So rather than having a few of those a week, now it's like one of those a week, and then we talk about taxes, and we talk about all these other sorts of like necessary aspects of the practice. But it's those conversations though that certainly keep us going.
Yeah.
And we really enjoy those moments for sure. They feel like a luxury to just like sit down and blow 2 hours or something talking about what we're reading.
Well, you guys are both remote too, from a distance, right? You guys. How often do you and Kelly talk?
That's true. I would say, to the point of collaborations, I think when Kelly and I thought about getting together, we kind of looked at these two.
Oh, cool.
As because you guys were probably like 3 or 4 years in at that time. When Kelly and I were deciding whether we wanted to kind of go for it together, and she was in Chicago and I was in Ohio, and so it was interesting kind of looking to colleagues as like a model of like, well, we like how they work, we like how we think that could work well for us. So I think that we talk almost daily. Yeah, we probably need to get to the part. We probably still are pretty inefficient in terms of how we move the practice forward. We're getting better. I think life makes you get better. right? There's just other things that become important and other relationships that become important. And I think that those things are really helpful for us to actually mature the office. So yeah, but I would say in some format or another, whether it's like we're DMing each other, or we're texting each other, or we're like snapping a picture of a colleague's project and sending it to one another and be like, hey, look what they did on the top here. This is really great. I feel like that's all part of a conversation too. Right. But yeah, in terms of like, I remember when we talked to you guys about it, you guys said at one point, like, and now this maybe sounds really quaint because we're in this Zoom world, but this was, like 7 years ago or something. You'd be like, oh, well, sometimes, we both just come into the office and we turn on like Skype or whatever it was at the time, and we just let it on all day. And we just work with each other there. That is, I always found that really fascinating. Again, now that feels like very odd to think of. But I think, I know that in terms of how Kelly and I collaborate, we do talk a lot, but it's always it's like we talk, then we hang up, then we work, then we call, then we, and it's or we'll send things back and forth. So anyway, that was kind of a long answer, but we talk a lot in a lot of different formats, and I'm probably to blame for that. As anyone that knows me, I'm probably to blame for any inefficiencies that we have in our office related to communication.
We talk, we talk every day, for sure. And we still do that. When we're on deadline, we do just leave the call open. Yeah. And I guess people do that.
We've never done that.
Really?
No. I'd be curious. We'll open it up here in a little bit because it's interesting at collaborations. It's so much like what school is like in teamwork. But yeah, I always found that fascinating, and we have never done it. Probably because I would never stop talking. If I knew she was there, I'd be like, Kelly?
Yeah, so just a little backstory. My partner Brendan and I, we started our practice, but we never lived in the same city during our practice. Now, we went to UCLA. We went to college together. And incidentally, Christy and Kelly also went to UCLA. So we had quite and Mira as well, when we talked about it.
That's true. Right.
Sorry. So I guess UCLA heavy on the collaboration. Anyway. Yeah. We had a shared set of interests from that time, and that's what supported this starting the practice, but always at a distance. So I always kid, like, when I see Brendan in person, which is, I don't know, a few times a year, though not so much recently. He looks a lot different in person than he does on screen, but I'm more familiar with him on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's really tall. He's a lot taller than me, but I forget that. Yeah. But that's where our kind of our relationship has actually been most developed, is through that channel.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask Corday a couple of questions about the kind of the kind of community, working in community, versus the sort of idea of, or examples of maybe working in partnership versus community, and whether or not there's in your experience. I guess like how you could can you talk a little bit about if there are distinctions in your mind about when it moves from the kind of intimacy of a partner and those kinds of projects versus kind of the more of the kind of an ecology of individuals coming together.
Give it or leave it. Is that what it is? Is that
Give it or leave it. Yeah,
Give it or leave it.
I want that book back. No, I don't actually want that book back.
I'm reading
I don't want
that
that book
right
back.
now.
I don't want that book
Mira
back.
let me borrow a book, and the title is "Give It or Leave It."
Yes. Yes.
And I think when
Give
it
it or
comes,
leave it, yes.
yeah, right.
Yes.
When it comes to
Yes.
partnership,
Yes.
that's what I think about. It's like there's things that you have to be okay with giving.
Yes.
Like you cannot always lay down the hammer.
Yeah.
And say this is it. It's more like, how do I become a better listener? I think that's when it's about partnership. I think it's about that. It's like, how do I heighten my intensity of listening, like listening to music, listening to people, listening to the environment. Like, how do I sort of embody their own sort of nuances, right? And accept that as a part of the process of making something, right? Whereas if it's a larger project where I'm directing, it's a lot of it is funneling, right? Channeling a lot of it. But when it's a partnership, that's how I feel, at least. If that makes any sense.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
no, for sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
It's really about listening when it comes to that.
I think that's exactly right. That kind of one of the things I've been learning is that, like, I would think we went into the relationship. Matthew and I went into relationship, I think, in a more transactional way. Like, we need to get this done. We can't do this shit on our own. And then it was like this whole other like world of generosity that it required, and this whole other elevated like state of trying to become a better listener, and being that, and then being able to also like have moments where someone reflects back some of the things that you've been trying to say and being like astonished, like thank you for listening to me for all this time, for being able to reflect that back to me. Like I think that's what's kind of beautiful about creative relationships and creative partnerships, maybe as compared to, let's say, just business partnerships, right? It's the business partnership, we know what that is. I mean, it looks like it's about a sort of transaction and efficiencies and other kinds of things that would, make you more money or something, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the creative relationships, it strikes a different tone. I think it can be complicated when you're trying to do both of those things. You have to do both of those things
It's
over long periods of time. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also, as you were talking about that, I think like what you give, how you listen, I think there's also something about collaborations that require you to be really vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think particularly in a creative realm,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
like you said, like a partnership that's about business and it's about transaction, I think everyone can just bring their A game.
Yeah.
And you can just sort of say, I know what I'm supposed to bring, I know what you're supposed to bring, let's just do what we're supposed to do here, and that is what it is. But I think when you're kind of intentionally in a collaboration where the goal is to grow, right? And not just grow financially, but like to grow a project, to grow a practice, to grow a relationship between your practice and teaching, whatever the aspects of yourself that are not your A game. Right?
Right.
Like you learn really quickly
Right.
Where your weaknesses are. And in an ideal scenario, but this is like, it doesn't always work out. In an ideal scenario, your weaknesses are the other person's strengths, but there are some places where the two of us look at each other, we've both just laid it out, and we're like, we don't know how to do this.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? And it's like,
That was bad.
right? Like this was, we need to figure this out. We need to learn this together. And I think that's a hard thing, especially as you get older. I feel like the deeper in that we get into our partnership, the more I have to admit that I don't know. And that's been really, I don't know.
Humbling.
It's very humbling. It's very humbling.
We started doing more public artwork, which has involved a lot of, quasi kind of failures. Just the nature of that process means that you're shortlisted for things and you submit a proposal, but you're not really selected that often. So you have like this micro success, which is, all right, now you can actually develop the project and pitch it, but then you don't get it. We don't get so many that we really have. We laugh about it, but we also. You share it. You share it
blame.
together.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's healthy. But I think there's, listening's. I think there's also challenge is also really important.
Challenge, yeah.
Challenging your partner.
That's hard.
Which is hard to do, and to know when to do it. But we found in our partnership that it's very productive. And sometimes just as a straw horse, like this is the way to move the work and the project forward is to have the courage to just be like, no, let's stop and rework this. Like, this isn't working, or yes, this worked before, but I don't think it works here. Ability. It's a space for invention. The right moment.
Yeah. You know. Do you know? You know, like, okay, yeah.
When it's time to
Split.
yeah.
That's a great question. It's a great question. How do you know when it's time to split? You know, I mean, I think usually projects like that never even make it to the table, right? You know, it's like you may have a conversation with a client and you're like, yeah, I want you to do this thing for me. And then you'll see one or two things sort of fall off and go wrong. And you're like, okay, they didn't respond to that, you know, in the month that I sent it, right? And these are like sort of signs that will tell you that this might not be a healthy sort of relationship that I'm about to get into. Now, how do you walk away from that? That's a challenge. That's a challenge, knowing exactly if this is maybe something that's happening. To walk away from. That's a great question. So I usually go after I mean, you both have worked on an incredible opportunity.
Speaking of
Y'all know MoMA PS1. Any failures in that experience of working on that project?
I mean, talk about like a kind of territory that's fraught. I mean, there was such intensity around that project and interest to succeed, but also just that produced. It's such a short and compressed period of time as well that I don't know that we really felt that time pressure. It was right at the holiday, and at least in our case, we had kids and family to deal with, and so we started on the project and then we literally put it on hold. And there was the holiday. We did not work through the holiday, and then we picked it back up. And I think that there was challenges to that project that were imposed unnecessarily, I guess. Time being one of them. Like, why did it have to happen so quickly? Why is this there was this compressed amount of time in order to develop the project? I mean, that was our challenge, I think. Also, there was an entire model that was built that didn't work out, so we had to rebuild the entire. I mean, so with this compressed period of time, I guess that makes it.
Didn't we try and share a model at some point?
God, yes.
Yeah, so we were competing against each other at that time. So it was pretty exciting. I think in our case, it was a pretty important project for us, even though we didn't win. Well, first of all, we had some people pretty strongly in our ears talking to us about, this is the type of project you want to get second place on.
Okay.
I don't know that's
interesting.
I don't know how to do that, but it makes it feel better when you actually do. You don't know if you got second, third, or fourth, but you could assume you got second. If you didn't get first, you could assume you got second.
We got second.
Technically, I think he got second. That's true. But I think it was a really important project for us. And I think in some cases, the intensity actually inversely sort of helped us, because we had been working on a project that was a lot slower coming up to having that opportunity. And then the fact that we had to turn something over so fast kind of forced us to just take something and scale it up and put it out there as a proposal. So I think in our office it was very successful because I think it allowed us to be quicker, and we're not very good at being quick. I think in terms of like why we failed, for me it's really clear why we failed. It was a pretty radical proposal when I look at it objectively. Like, that's crazy, right? Like those were some really big lines. They were pretty aggressive, I've been told.
Is that the title? What's the title?
It was called Loud Lines.
Loud Lines,
So
yeah.
definitely there was like an intentionality behind it, but I think for some people it was like a borderline like profane in terms of how like visually aggressive it was. So that might have maybe a little more time, we would have figured out how to loosen the edges a little bit. But that's, yeah.
I mean, in terms of collaboration, I mean, that's an example of a project where we kind of grew a new team, at least, like, because we were making a proposal that had to be built and had to have some level of realism to it. I mean, we worked with a team in New York that we hadn't yet built up in the past, which was fun to reach out to all those people as really kind of collaborators in the process. I mean, this is not a project that has a huge budget. I mean, the people that are signing on to work with you are in it because they want to be part of the work. So that was I think a fun experience, and that can come from kind of intense constraints, whether it's time or money based. Like you kind of find answers, and a lot of those times those answers don't just come from you, right? They come from others that become part of the team. And you have to gather your resources in those moments, and I think that was a fun thing about that project.
Should we all came with some questions in our pocket, I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
to try to help move things forward. Although, do you know what time it is, or should we
It's,
open it up at a certain point?
4:52, maybe the next 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because one thing I thought was kind of interesting when we think about, when we were asked to kind of do this, I think initially I do think the email was like about collaboration or something, and then I looked at who was here and I was like, oh, we all have partnerships or we all collaborate with people, like, oh, that's clear. And then I saw the title that came out, I think this week, and it was like membership was the title. And I thought that was a really interesting way of kind of framing it. And I mean that because I think that in 2022, I think we think of things like collaborations as, and maybe this is from my point of view, I think they seem very positive. Culturally, they seem very positive. They're sort of a move away from like the single author to like multiple authors. So I think if you say the word collaborate, it's like, like confetti is coming. Like everyone's happy. Like that's good. That's a good way to start. But if you say the word membership, the reaction could be like, oh, you're in that club or you're not in that club. And it made me sort of think that these things, there's a fine line maybe between, and even just between a partnership sometimes, it can be it can feel isolating to other people if you are in a tight partnership of any kind, or maybe just to kind of broaden it out, and you do work on much larger collaborations, but I think kind of prior to starting my practice, I sort of worked on, I think, what we genuinely thought of as like a collaboration, this kind of possible mediums project, which started with this ambition of wanting to have a conversation with people that were like not in our geographic locations, but were doing similar works. And that started very much from a place of desire to collaborate with people that we had seen their work, but we didn't know them, and we wanted to know them, and we wanted to have that conversation. But I would say, if I could be honest, 5 years into that project of the Possible Mediums project, it became a book, etc. We definitely got fair critique perhaps, from people that sort of said, like, that project really made some people feel like if they weren't in that project that they were out of something. And so, I don't know, I maybe just bring that up as an interesting point of view of like, what do we think of in terms of the idea that that maybe it is okay to sometimes be a single author who has ideas, and in fact you could actually be more open to collaboration because of that, versus sort of teaming up or pairing up, which inherently is collaborative, but also kind of might make other people feel different ways. So I was just I don't know. It's more of a point to kind of have a discussion of that line of where we see it as positive and negative.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought Possible Mediums was fantastic in the way that it built kind of a new culture, kind of in the middle of many, like I think kind of it was in the middle of the country, kind of geographically, but also I felt like it was comprised of people that were between kind of graduating from school, beginning to practice. They were kind of had not landed yet in terms of where projects were necessarily at, and so I guess to use the term, it provided a medium for that work to develop and flourish. And so I don't know. I think that it was. I would agree. Like, if the ambition at first was really quite open-ended and welcoming, and created a kind of space for those that were in between these two different areas, like. But then it was so successful, I feel like, in some ways, that maybe that's what produces the boundary, is like that it becomes more kind of calcified, or the rules or the kind of the parameters become clear for what establishes the edges, and it's at that moment that it becomes exclusive in some way. But yeah, I don't know how do you tune that edge to keep it kind of the edge porous. I don't know. That's tricky.
I kind of want to ask Mira. I'm gonna say a couple of names, and I want you to think about membership and collaboration.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay, I'll try.
You ready? Okay. Carrie Mae Weems, Lorraine O'Grady, Nikita Gale, Lorna Simpson, Kenny James Marshall, Mary Louise Turner, and Mira Henry.
Corday.
I'm curious how you see membership and collaboration in the context of Black art,
Yeah.
in the Black art movement and community.
Yeah.
You know, because you are a part of that lineage, if I can say. How do you feel about that membership and collaboration, and what that may open up or close in that same conversation?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. And I think that it's you know, when I did Rough Code, I felt that I wasn't really sure who I wanted to talk to at that moment. And I had one of my friends who come, and she was talking to me about the work, and she said, you know, you need to expand like way past architecture and talk to a lot more people, and a lot more, like, you need to like shift your like point of view about where your conversation is. And I think that started a journey of kind of remembering, right? So like, when I was, 18, I, discovered Lorraine O'Grady, and I discovered Carrie Mae Weems, right? I was, 18 years old in college for the first time, seeing these women. I'd never seen like radical Black female art at that time. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is blowing my mind. Kara Walker had her first show in 1998 at the school that I was at the time, at the Renaissance Society. And I saw this work, and I was like, oh my, I'd never, like, it was explosive, right? It was like this moment in time so I think that, like, for me, it's my journey right now has been in how to kind of stitch back, kind of return back to some of these things that are part of my own roots, from just growing up, being in the world, being creative, being Black, being multiracial, and trying to now understand that as an architect, now in my new role, and my current role, let's say, understand, trying to thread that, trying to bring that together has been a really exciting thing for me. I had an experience though recently in a similar way where I was working with a friend of mine who, another Black architect, not on this coast, but we were talking about what would it mean to like build up a conversation of young Black architects right now, working at all different scales and all different, this kind of radical idea. This was, like a year and a half ago, and it was tremendously difficult to start to think about that. The number was almost like it started off like, oh, we know who the 50 people would be, and then it started to be like, wait a minute, no, it's like how do you like, it kept on like, how do you even create that list, because to make that list felt in some ways exclusive. And also in that way counterproductive. Like it would have to become kind of like this massive like archive. In fact, how do you consolidate it? How do you make it joyful without it making it exclusive? What are the edges of that? And the project went on hold. We were like, it's not right. We're not there yet, I mean, it's almost like you kind of have to start like almost just like a set of like very small conversations that feel like beautiful, rather than try and take this like big sweep and like we're gonna bring all the folks together. Like felt wrong. It's like it felt really, really wrong. It didn't. And so, I think that that kind of feeling of first wanting community, right, and wanting community that is. But then also not wanting to create a kind of exclusivity at the same time is really, I think, is a really something that I've thought about quite a bit too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that community is much more participatory and open because of that. Like you're part of the community because you participate.
I guess.
Yeah, whereas membership is more you're invited to kind of be a member, or there's rules for membership. It seems like there's a little bit of, like community seems like a much more open-ended and participatory and inclusive way to maybe think about a group.
But I wonder whether or not, like that in that way, if we can think about collab. I mean, we're not really talking about collaboration. We're talking about community and talking about bringing kind of what that looks like. And I would even maybe add the kind of the question of lineage, because you brought that word to the table, lineage. And I think that it's so malleable. Like I would encourage like this kind of totally open way of thinking about lineage, that just to even utter the name is to like bring somebody there in the work, right? Like it's not like some people are allowed to do it and others aren't, right? Like that's something. I mean, you brought up Nikita Gale. I'm sure very people know who she is. She's an artist, but she's our generation, working right now in LA, and who does actually very architectural work. But when she talks about her work, it's very much about what would it mean to bring that person back, somebody who's no longer alive, but nonetheless can be a part of the conversation, or somebody who's not in the room can still be a part of the conversation. And that being this kind of powerful thing that we can do as people who, let's say, form discourse, right? But that's something that we can, when we work together, but that we have that itself is a creative act, a kind of conjuring up, right, of people there or not there, but that you want to be alive in a project, right? So that's a different kind of member collaboration,
right,
to a degree.
It's actually, I thought of that
beautiful,
earlier today. Like I was going to kind of ask all of you, like, do you ever think that, like, is there someone that you collaborate with that you've never met?
Right.
Like I think that there's people that Kelly and I keep coming back to that for sure, in some ways I'm like, okay, at this point, this person's kind of a collaborator in their office,
Right.
our office, they have no idea, but we come back to it. It's like precedent to a whole different level.
Definitely.
And I was just curious whether I hadn't thought about it in that way until coming today and trying to think about like, what are the different ways of thinking about collaboration, and and then when you mentioned, this idea that like some people's project can be about sort of bringing work to the table or within a conversation where the conversation is no longer physically possible, it's a pretty fascinating way to think about collaboration.
Should we call it?
Yeah.
Well,
Let's do that.
Should we open it up for?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't Basecamp that often, so
I
I'm
know,
super
this is
happy
such
to
a
be
my first
here.
Basecamp,
So
so-
nice on a Friday.
there
Does
any
it
questions?
usually open up for questions?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does?
Yeah. Any questions about anything from anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, being a young architect, has it had to collaborate almost at all as of now? I'm a little bit concerned about how you give up the love and infatuation for your idea. Like as a creative, I feel like there's an emotional attachment to your idea, and how do you get past that and allow someone to better it in their own way?
You go there. You start.
Oh,
You start. No?
Yeah, I think it's a, I think it's a funny thing. It's like Arthur Jafa, one of my favorite artists, was talking to another artist named Jason Moran, and Jason Moran was telling him a story about how he was playing pool with someone, and he asked him, "Hey, do you want to break?" And you know what breaking is? You put the balls in the triangle, and he's like, "No." Jason's like, "Yeah, you go ahead and break, right?" And so the guy proceeds to put the balls in next to the holes. Instead of putting it on the triangle, he lays it out, and then he goes and proceeds to knock every ball in, right? And at the end, he said, "You get it? Essentially, you got to set yourself up so you can win." And I think when it comes to a collaboration, I think about that. I think about how can we come together to make this thing better. That's where I sort of go into a project, right? How can we succeed together? And I think there is a little piece of you that has to sort of die in a way, in a good way. Sort of, you have to release it, And I don't necessarily have the words to articulate how you do that, but I think there is something to be said about giving something away and seeing what else may come from that experimentation. And I think you see that a lot in music, right? How collaboration happens. Yeah, it's a great question, though. I'm curious how you all might answer that.
I think it's collaborating is humbling. I think that you have to be. You have to recognize maybe the thing that you want may not be the only way to do it and the most important thing, and that may actually be better. And trust your collaborator enough to be able to have input on whether or not that's the case. So coming to the table and being open enough to kind of take what your ideas are and put them on the table and step back from them and allow the project to be out here instead of in here, that's like maybe a good first step, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. First of all, it's a really awesome question. And I would say a couple things have maybe happened over time. I think one is that I think it'll come at your own pace. So I think the fact that like your ideas, you're still emotionally attached to them, I think that's really natural and it's a good thing. And I think at your own pace, you'll start to figure out ways that you can let go of things. But I also think it's really important, even in a collaboration, that you develop yourself, right? And even once you're in that collaboration, there's still some things that you hold on to that are yours, that are in your head, that you can't fully describe. And I think that that's okay. But I think when you think about like, well, maybe, I'm going to have to do teamwork at some point, right? Like, how am I going to give that over? I think that I would say that, like goosebumps, like it's also incredibly rewarding to see your own work objectively instead of subjectively. And I think that's something that working in a partnership gives you. Or if you have to, it's Thursday, you got to hand over that 3D model to your partner, and you come in the next day. It's going to be a little different, but you're going to see your own work in it in a very different way, and it helps you become a better critic. I think it helps the design to develop, and it's rewarding to. And again, I would never take away having personal contact with some of your work. But it'll kind of help you to understand that like I can see my ideas in different ways, and you'll even seek out sometimes like I'm too into myself, like I need to make sure that next project I'm going to see if I can get more input. That's a great question, especially I think in school.
Well, I mean, this is actually built into the entire profession. We make drawings to give to other people to build things. I mean, that's that release, that moment of release. I mean, you ambition for it to be built a particular way, but you have to be humble enough to realize that may not be the case. And so I think that the collaboration may not always be with another architect or with another designer, but maybe with someone who brings a different expertise. And so maybe in a way it's that asymmetry that also expresses how important collaboration is. Clearly you have different expertises that you bring, and that demands a certain amount of flexibility in the way that you see a particular project being realized.
Any other questions? Yeah. You lose.
So I was thinking about how when you think of collaboration, adversity always comes with collaboration, which is often a good thing because that's how we learn and we grow. But I was thinking about the conversation of intensity and how your intensity and your collaborator's intensity can affect that adversity, and maybe like how you learn to either tone back your intensity or up your intensity, and how that can affect a collaboration.
I was going to let you answer it first if you want.
I was going to let Mira
Oh, okay.
take a swing.
I don't know. I always find that I feel like I'm the most intense person in the room. That's the problem. Is I always feel like the most intense person in the room, and I always have to feel like I bring myself. So that's. I'm not a very good person to ask that question because I don't always have a very good lever on that. I'm always like 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm similar. I feel like Kelly, this is where I wish Kelly was here, because she'd be like, well, I kind of wish that she was a little less.
I'm a 10 too. Brennan, my partner, he's a 1.
He's a 1.
He's
All
a
right,
1.
so I got to answer this.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
All right, yeah. I think it's like you got to kung fu this situation, right?
Yeah,
you got to
exactly.
figure out a way to like. It's really interesting, right? When someone's a 10 and you're a 1, because maybe I'm a 1, right? I'm a natural listener, and I think with that, I think you have to just like be in a space where actually what you're receiving is also being filtered too at the same time, right? And I think you have to be keen on what gravitates to you while that person is giving you a 10, right? Because you can't take in everything. So you sort of become your own editor in a way in that process. And I think any collaboration is really about editing. It's like having a good editor who can see things that you can't see, right? Because you're just like directly in it. So that's how I would answer that. Yeah.
If I could psychoanalyze you, I mean, you must
Right.
be. I would guess you.
Yeah.
You might be. You're probably a very good editor.
Right.
That's what he does.
Yeah.
What I do.
That's what
Right.
he does.
I mean,
Yeah.
but like also in the relationship, like meaning
Yeah.
like you can hear like that person that's giving you a 10 that just runs into the room and just like is popping off.
That's right.
You can sort of be like, we're gonna go with that and
Yeah.
that. You can kind of pick and choose.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's interesting. I do wish Kelly were here for this moment because she might see it differently. But when I step away and I realize, man, I really just like unloaded in that conversation. I'm always thinking, she's way more confident than I am. Like she's way more confident. She says less. She's a better editor, I think. So I don't know if that gets to your question, but I guess if you were kind of talking like what to do in that thing, and I would sort of say like, I think with a little bit of time that you realize, I think they both have their strengths.
Definitely.
But just because someone is more intense, oftentimes, maybe I'm speaking for myself, I think sometimes that intensity is sort of like masking like uncertainty. And that, I'm just bringing so many things to the table to sort of see what kind of lands. And so it's super helpful. I think it's equally as valuable to have the person that's like, we're not doing that, and that. That one maybe.
All right. I think that's it.
All right.
Thanks,
you
y'all.
guys.
Thank you.
Fun.
Well, this was fun. I'm going to do Basecamp every Friday.
You can only
This one was like-